let me move on to a question that's quite interesting do men and women sleep differently? So we all know there's big differences between men and women in many different areas, and it's no different for sleep. There are differences in sleep between men and women, and there are also differences in the types of sleep disorders that men have compared to women. So men are more likely to have sleep apnea, which is the sleep breathing problem where people stop breathing during the night. But women are more likely to have insomnia, which is basically defined as having difficulty falling asleep, having difficulty where you wake up during the night and can't go back to sleep, or even just having a non-restorative sleep, just waking up feeling like you have not had a good sleep, or also waking up what's really too early in the morning for you. So what's shown in this figure is the difference in men and women in the rate of insomnia complaints that you see across the population. And you can see that in the younger age group, for age 6 to 13, there's no difference between boys and girls in how many have insomnia. But after the time of puberty, right up until after the age 65, women are always more likely to have insomnia than men. And there is especially a bigger difference between men and women when you look at in the after age 45, which is the time when women are sort of around 50 when they're beginning to go through menopause. And this is one of those detailed analyses of the microarchitecture that I was talking about that we're making in our lab. And you can just look at the top two figures where you see the slow wave or the deep sleep activity in a man across the night and the deep sleep activity in a woman across the night. And you can see that it's about double in the woman compared to the man. So these are the top tracings that we're looking at. And at the bottom, it's showing the average data for the group of men and women, looking at this deep slow wave activity in men and women across the 3 cycles of the night in non-REM sleep, which is the deep sleep, and REM sleep. And women were always higher in terms of this amount of deep sleep, slow wave activity that they're getting compared to men. And another difference, this is from results taken from Dr. Armitage, another researcher, and what she did was to look at, well, how do men and women respond to sleep deprivation? So she took a group of, this is young men and young women, and deprived them of sleep for a whole night, and then the following night they were allowed to sleep, and she measured their sleep patterns. And what she showed was that the women had a bigger response to the sleep deprivation than the men. So you can see that in the blue bar with the women, they have a bigger increase in slow wave sleep compared to the men after being sleep deprived. And something similar is seen when women are given certain hypnotics. They also have this greater slow wave sleep response to some hypnotics than men. And so it's certainly showing that there are functional differences in sleep regulation between men and women. Of course, though, this is the paradox, though. So why do women report to poorer sleep than men, despite having this so much more of the deeper sleep than men? And there's various ways to talk about this. I don't think it's just a matter like women complain more and therefore they say they have a worse sleep than men. That's not a good answer. But there's lots of factors that could play into it. So one thing is that what we're measuring in the lab is quite different from what you're saying about your sleep. So we're measuring electrical brain activity. When I ask you, well, what was your sleep like last night? There's many factors that go into that answer. It's also largely driven by, well, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning? And that will influence your sleep quality, whereas electrical brain activity is just electrical brain activity. Also, the studies done where they show women more likely to have insomnia and report to poorer sleep are large epidemiology studies taking a survey of large numbers of women and men, whereas the lab-based studies are just of small numbers of men and women who are willing to participate in the studies. So there's differences in the groups that are being looked at. And then, of course, there's also differences in terms of women are affected by the life cycle. So depending on whether a woman is, what phase of the menstrual cycle she's in, or whether she's pregnant, postpartum, approaching menopause or postmenopause, all these factors in the reproductive life cycle can be impacting her sleep. So I think there's many factors that go into explaining why can there be differences in the perception of sleep versus lab-based recordings in sleep. And that's going to be coming up again, this type of theme. So let's talk a little bit about some issues of sleep that are particular to women. So shown here are the changes that you see in estrogen, one of the main reproductive hormones in women, across her life cycle. And right from puberty, estrogen increases, and then you see it cycling up and down across every menstrual cycle. And as she starts to approach the menopause, estrogen levels, they actually become quite erratic, and then they begin to drop off and become low in the postmenopause. And why does this matter? Well, it matters because estrogens can act in the brain. Estrogens and other hormones, the progesterones, the androgens, all these reproductive hormones can influence the other chemicals in the brain, and they can act on little receptors in the brain to influence sleep regulation. Because keep in mind that sleep is controlled by the brain, and so any chemicals or any substances like estrogen that can enter the brain tissue and influence sleep regulatory centers can influence sleep. So I've done quite a number of studies looking at how sleep is impacted by the menstrual cycle, because this is quite a nice natural experiment where women are just having changes in the hormones across the menstrual cycle, and sometimes the hormones are high, sometimes they're low, and then if you bring the woman into the lab at those different times, then you can begin to see how sleep is impacted by these changes. So this figure is showing the hormone changes that you see across the menstrual cycle. So in the top panel, you see the pituitary hormones, which are the regulatory hormones. So luteinizing hormone is LH. And then focus your attention on the middle one, because those are the estrogen and progesterone hormones. And right across the menstrual cycle, you see estrogen levels begin to gradually increase in about the middle of the cycle, and that's when ovulation occurs. And then they drop off and sort of stay at a steady level in the second part of the menstrual cycle, whereas progesterone is low until the middle of the cycle, and after ovulation, you see this spike in progesterone. So at this point, this is the second phase of the menstrual cycle, the luteal phase, and that's where progesterone and estrogen are high compared to the follicular phase where progesterone and estrogen are relatively low. And shown in the bottom part of the figure is body temperature, which shows just how nicely, it's a good marker and shows how the body is impacted by these hormone changes, where you see this big increase in body temperature that stays there. Probably it's because of the progesterone. So what about sleep? So again, if we look at some of our major measures that we've obtained from lab recordings, so the women came to the laboratory on a night in their mid-follicular phase. That was when estrogen and progesterone were low, and on a night in the mid-luteal phase, which was when progesterone and estrogen levels were relatively high. And we looked at 3 types of sleep. That's stage 2 sleep, where the sleep spindles are, and then there's slow wave sleep, which is the deep sleep, and then REM sleep. And we found surprisingly very little effect on the deep sleep. So that wasn't affected by the hormones, but REM sleep was. So when the time of the luteal phase, when progesterone and estrogen were high, REM sleep was low. And in support of that, we also find a nice correlation between the amount of REM sleep that the women had with their progesterone and estrogen concentrations. So the higher levels of progesterone and the higher levels of estrogen, the less percentage REM sleep they had. And finally, another marker, again looking at the more detailed analysis that we perform with sleep records, we see that in the luteal phase, their number of sleep spindles is increased compared to the follicular phase. So the it seems that progesterone is probably responsible for both the increase in body temperature and in this increase in the fast spindle frequency during sleep. And the idea is that we think that this increase in spindles is there to help maintain sleep during the night. So in summary, what we see is that women have more sleep spindles in the luteal phase, and they have less REM sleep, and they also have shorter REM periods during the night in the luteal phase, which correlates with the hormones, progesterone and estrogen. And I didn't show the data, but we also know that the core body temperature, the extent to which the body temperature drops during the night is less during the luteal phase because of progesterone compared to the follicular phase. So the evidence that we get collected from looking at the menstrual cycle shows that the female reproductive hormones impact sleep and circadian rhythms. So it's sort of supporting the concept that the hormones can influence sleep. So what about the menopausal transition? So this is a time when there's lots of hormone changes, and a time of fluctuating hormones, a time of which then is associated with lots of symptoms, so sleep complaints, hot flushes, all sorts of nasty symptoms that happen. And what I've got in this figure is showing the changes that you see in, again, if we just look at estrogen especially. So if the 0 is the time of the final menstrual period or menopause, estrogen levels after that time have dropped and stay low, and then FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, is high. And these hormones are often what are measured by your physician to see at which stage of menopause are you in. And the time the time that leading up to that final menstrual period, which is at the 0, can take sort of about 4 or 5 years on average. So you can see that across the few years before menopause, you see gradual decreases in estrogen and gradual increases in follicle-stimulating hormone until the time of the final menstrual period. So it's not a sudden event, and it's during this time of gradual hormonal changes, which is associated also with lots of ups and downs in estrogen. That's the time when women are most symptomatic. So sleep complaints are very common during this time. In fact, it's one of the most bothersome symptoms that women will report. They are being reported by up to 50% of women, which shows just how common the sleep disturbances are. So you get women who may have been previously good sleepers, and then they start to approach menopause and suddenly not such good sleepers anymore. And there's various factors that could be driving this. So, of course, there's the hormonal changes that you're getting. Those erratic changes in hormones can influence sleep. There's also an increase in other symptoms, like the hot flushes, and those can impact sleep. And then there's also an increase in depression or mood symptoms, and mood symptoms impact sleep. And that is aside from the changes that are happening in a woman's life at this point, where maybe kids are going to college, they might be taking care of elderly parents. And so all these factors that sort of put sleep into the woman's life into context at this time can be impacting her sleep. So what a group did, this was now about 10 years ago, a group did a large study of about 1,000 women and wanted to see, well, we hear that women are saying their sleep is changing around menopause, so therefore we think if we measure sleep in the lab, we will find that sleep is very different and very disturbed. This group did an important study that was very well done and looked at a group of women who were premenopausal, so in their early 40s, and a group of women who were perimenopausal, so those are the women approaching menopause, and then a group of women who were postmenopausal. And what they did was to make measures of sleep in the lab and also ask the women about their sleep. And if you look here, this is some of the results from their study. So the women, this is now what I've got here is the perimenopausal women compared to the younger women. And the women who are perimenopausal, approaching menopause, report that it's much harder for them to fall asleep. And they also report being much more dissatisfied with their sleep than the younger women. So that supports all the other, that supports the anecdotal evidence, and it supports surveys showing that women do report more sleep problems around menopause. But then look here, which is now the objective sleep measures that are made from the measures of the electrical brain activity. And here, actually, women had a better sleep as measured in the lab when they were perimenopausal compared to the younger women. And they even had less of the light stage 1 sleep, and they even had more of the deep slow wave sleep. So this was not the result that they wanted to get. Yes. Yeah, oh, okay, those are confidence intervals. So an odds ratio is really looking at the how many women in the perimenopausal group compared to the younger women are like, what's the, sort of almost like a risk factor, how much more likely are they? Yes, and this is 4 times more likely. So the women who are perimenopausal were four times more likely to report difficulty initiating sleep. Yeah, so quite a big difference. And then this is just showing the percentages and the confidence interval for that. And basically showing here that the women who are in their perimenopause have 7.6% stage 1 sleep, whereas the younger women are having more at 8.9%. And the women who are perimenopause are having 16% slow wave sleep, which is a good thing. Compared to the almost 13%, which is less in the younger women. So when these results came out, then there was a little bit of scratching of the head, I guess, because it really wasn't what people expected to see. And it's also, it's coming up again, this theme of, well, what people say and what we're measuring is not always, it's not coinciding. And it led one other researcher or MD to make this comment. And it's, yeah, who do we want to believe? And so with this background, I started in the last couple of years to start another study looking more at sleep in women as they are approaching menopause. And the same, there's many other groups now who are looking in greater depth at sleep, especially as women are approaching menopause or post-menopause, to try and understand, well, what exactly is happening during this time? You know, why are so many people noticing disturbances in their sleep, and yet it's not always being measured in the lab? And so there's been a lot more emphasis on doing longitudinal studies, so tracking women as they go through menopause, because that's much more relevant than just getting a group of women who are young, a group who are premenopausal, a group of women who are beginning to go through menopause, and then a group of women post-menopause. You know, a cross-sectional look is, you can miss a lot of information compared to longitudinal studies. And so with the longitudinal studies that are beginning to come out, they are showing relationships with the changes that you're seeing in hormones with the sleep difficulties that women are experiencing.